right. It's the That's Enough Out of You podcast with Bill and Sean. How's it going today, Sean?
What's up, Billy Raids? How's things, pal?
We're doing pretty good, but, running around, busy as usual.
Oh, I hear you there. Never a dull moment.
What's that?
Never a dull moment.
Never. So we have a really important show today. We're doing this on the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And Sean, you have a lot of material that you've put together for this show.
Yeah, we're going to take a lot from William Pepper, who was a lawyer and an author. He did a lot of work. He tried to get James Earl Ray prove that he was innocent. We're also going to take some from the civil trial, a lot of documentation that came from there. But one thing I want to point out, Bill, before we even start, is that when we mentioned Martin Luther King on a question episode, Nate the Great asked a question about MLK. Lisa Pease pointed out to me that I kind of misspoke on there. And I do that from time to time, Bill. I mean to say one thing and I say another. But she said, like, when I said that the Martin Luther King family sued the United States government, that wasn't actually accurate. They actually sued a man by the name of Lloyd Jowers, who we're going to talk about tonight. And when the guilty verdict came back, the courts applied the guilt, the higher percentage to the American government, to the intelligence agencies, and put the responsibility on them more so than Jowers. So I was right in saying that it was a guilty verdict, against the U.S. government, but it wasn't that the King family sued them. They were actually suing this guy, Lloyd Jowers. But when the evidence came out, it was damaging to the U.S. government agencies. So just so we clear that up, buddy, because Lisa always points that stuff out. And I love when she does that because, Bill, sometimes I'm up here. There's that one episode I'm talking about Ruby, and I mean to talk about Oswald, and you knew what I meant.
Right.
Sometimes I get so fired up with this stuff, buddy. I just I misspoke on that. So just want to clear that up.
We talk a lot, Sean, so we're not always gonna, it's hard to get everything right. So
sometimes, Bill, you just, you mean to say one thing, you say another, but
right. All right.
I'm glad she pointed that out.
Yep. All right, Sean. So you want to get into this topic then?
Yeah, let's get into it, Billy.
Let's do it.
All right, Bill. So Martin Luther King Jr. Let's start with, civil rights. MLK, he advanced civil rights through nonviolence. And this is where he starts to get targeted, Bill, by the racists. And we know, the Ku Klux Klan, stuff like that. And also a term you're going to hear tonight, Bill, the Dixie Mafia. And I don't like that term mafia to be used for anything other than the Italian-American Cosa Nostra or the Italian crime families in Italy and Sicily, because that's where the word mafia does. So even when you're talking about the Irish mob, the Jewish mob, I don't like to use that word mafia. Mafia should be specific to Cosa Nostra. So the Dixie Mafia, Bill, let's call them the Dixie Mob. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're in no way affiliated other than doing some business from time to time with Cosa Nostra. They're totally different. They're really a Southern, kind of WASP club that, they're criminals. They're organized criminals, but they're in no way, Cosa Nostra. So let's not get them confused. But getting back on point here, Martin Luther King participated and led marches for, Black people's right to vote, for desegregation, against the Jim Crow laws. I'm sure everybody knows, what the Jim Crow laws are, but just, for those who don't, they were introduced in the South basically to enforce, racial segregation. He also spoke for labor rights and all other civil rights. And then he organized in 1963 to March on Washington, Bill. And JFK approved the march. And he had RFK supervise it to make sure everything went well. And in 1964, MLK won the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, the second thing that MLK got involved with was poverty and the Poor People's Campaign. And this was an effort to gain economic justice for all poor people in the United States. And this is where MLK starts to get targeted by the 1%, whatever you want to call them, the Eastern establishment, the people that they don't want nothing to do with taking care of the poor people. They're in control, the ruling state, whatever you want to call them, Bill. And he demanded economic and human rights for everyone. And in 1968, it was estimated that 60 million Americans, Bill, okay, which was 33% of the population, lived under the poverty line. I mean, could you believe that, buddy?
It's like a third world country. It's unbelievable.
It's the United States of America, Bill.
That's amazing.
And so now he's already, got the wrath of racist. He's got the wrath of the 1%. And then the thing that's going to put him on the radar, the national security state, the intelligence community, is when he comes out against the Vietnam War. And the thing is, there's going to be a memo that's going to be sent from J. Edgar Hoover to Richard Helms after MLK came out, calling MLK a national security threat, if you could believe that, Bill. And anybody would, and let me put it this way, Bill, any paper that comes across Richard Helms' desk, and we talk about Helms a lot on this show, any paper that comes across his desk that calling somebody a national security threat, that person is usually either their government's overthrown or they're assassinated. I mean, that's a fact.
Right.
So Hoover knows what he's doing when he sends a memo to Richard Helms. But, other civil rights activists, they didn't want MLK to get involved with this, Bill, with the anti-war movement, because they didn't want to isolate the Lyndon Johnson administration. But April 4th, 1967, he came out against it, Bill. And what happened was MLK saw pictures in a magazine of the destruction that was going on over there, and it brought him to tears. He started crying, and he delivered a speech called Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. And this was on April 4th, 1967. And Bill, that's a year to the date that MLK is going to be assassinated. And there's nobody sitting out there that could tell me that that's a coincidence.
Yeah. Wow.
And, he said that the U.S. in Vietnam was there to occupy it as a colony, not to free anyone. And he called the U.S. the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And he connected the world with economic injustice, arguing that the country needed serious moral change. And, he said that the war took money and resources away that could be spent on social welfare. And he accused the U.S. government of killing 1 million Vietnamese, mostly children. And Bill, the words that he used were really, really, strict, coming down on the government. And actually, his popularity dipped. There's a poll in 1966, 67. I mean, the 63% of Americans had a non-favorable view of Martin Luther King. And it was after that speech. Could you believe that, Bill? 63%. And only 22% favored the March on Washington. So
really,
I mean, it's incredible, Bill, to think now. But yeah, a lot of Americans had an unfavorable view, and remember, Bill, when he comes out against the Vietnam War, a lot of the bad stuff that was going on hadn't come out yet. So the public hasn't changed yet as far as not supporting the war. Yeah, their view hasn't changed yet. And Martin Luther King came out, and it was really a gutsy move to do what he did. And give that speech that he gave on this.
Yeah.
So what happens now, Bill, is J. Edgar Hoover targets Martin Luther King. There's no way to say it another way. And it was true to COINTELPRO operation that we talked about before on the show. COINTELPRO and Operation Chaos. Chaos was more the CIA side. COINTELPRO was the FBI. And the only reason we know about COINTELPRO is because these citizens that were anti-war people broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and they got the files from COINTELPRO. And what it was, Bill, it was, a series of FBI covert, and there's no other way to say this, illegal projects, including illegal surveillance, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic organizations. Really, their main target was the civil rights movement. And it was run by a guy named William Sullivan. And we mentioned Sullivan before on the show, Bill. He was the assistant director at the FBI. He was in charge. Hoover put him in charge of the COINTELPRO. He was real close with James Angleton at the CIA. who we talked about. They even rehearsed their speeches and stuff before they would testify. And Sullivan dies in a suspicious hunting accident, Bill, the weekend before he was supposed to testify. And that's suspicious in itself because he knew this is the guy that knew where all the bodies were buried, so to speak. He was involved in so much of these operations from the FBI side, working with the CIA, working with Angleton. But this program, COINTELPRO, Bill, it used psychological warfare, smearing individuals and groups, used forged documents, fake documents, planting false reports in the media, harassment, wrongful imprisonment, violence, including assassinations. And it was all in the name of protecting national security. And, the worst part is, Bill, is that the FBI under Sullivan's direction and Hoover's sent a letter to Martin Luther King, and I'm sure you heard this, Bill, stating that they had evidence of Martin Luther King being involved in extramarital affairs.
Yeah.
And if he didn't want that to turn public, then he could commit suicide. I mean, can you imagine that, Bill?
Unbelievable.
Can you imagine that? I mean, it's just incredible. And this is the attack that the civil rights movement was under by the FBI. And the thing is, Bill, they're calling Martin Luther King a national security threat. Why aren't they targeting the mafia at this point? Why aren't they targeting the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis? They're not a national security threat.
Right.
And it's unbelievable. So let's get to the assassination. So April 4th, 1968, Bill. The official story is that James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King with a single shot from a Remington rifle while Martin Luther King was on the second floor balcony at a Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And he supposedly shot from a public bathroom, Bill, in a rooming house across the street. Now, there's multiple problems with this. First of all, if you're going to choose to assassinate somebody, Bill, why would you choose a public bathroom when anybody could walk in? When you're in the middle of shooting somebody and anybody could walk in a public bathroom. But right. There's a tree, Bill, blocking the window, okay? And this was reported by several cops that were on the scene. And the tree was cut down the next day. And we're going to talk about who actually ordered that to be cut down. And it's going to tie back to the Dixie Mob. And, it's just with that tree, the branch blocking the window, there's no way that James Earl Ray could have got that shot off. So to me, that's game over right there.
So, Sean, let me ask you this before you keep going. You said the tree was cut down the next day.
Yes.
Were there pictures taken, or like how do we know that the tree
we know this from cops, Bill. We know this from cops that spoke to people. William Pepper did a lot of work that I mentioned earlier. The stuff that came out at the civil trial, people that seen it, and it was a matter of record, Bill, that tree was cut down. It was ordered by the Memphis Public Works, and we're going to get to that. They also going to cut down the bushes across from there where witnesses said that they seen a sniper hiding. And the next day that was cut down. And then, you could say, well, how could a sniper be over there? There's no cover over there, but the bushes were cut down. And another problem, Bill, is he supposedly had to stand on the bathtub to look out the window. Now, imagine, Bill, standing on the outside edges of your bathtub, that little edge on the side.
Right.
And you're standing there with a rifle, looking out a window. You got a tree blocking you, and you're supposed to get this shot off. Now,
yeah,
I don't know if you're familiar with a person by the name of Mike Baker, who's a former CIA guy, which I love when they say former, Bill, like it's some kind of country club. They pay by the month. But
right.
he was on Joe Rogan. He has a show, Black Files Declassified, where he gets a lot of access into the agency. But he was a CIA supervisor for years on operations all over the world. Mike Baker's probably not even his real name. But he did a show years ago where he tried to recreate the assassination. And he was, being the role of sniper. And he was standing on the bathtub, and it took him like 3 tries before he was able to get the shot off. Now, they didn't have a tree blocking his view, but he was able to get it off. And the thing is, Mike Baker, you could see like this man, first of all, being a CIA operations officer like he was, he had extensive training, and you could see the way he handles guns and stuff. This guy is very skilled with a rifle, and he's skilled with weapons, and he's very comfortable handling them. There's no evidence that James Earl Ray was ever, skilled with a rifle and comfortable with a rifle. Mm-hmm. So that to me, that whole thing, and the fact that they didn't have a tree blocking, and it took him a couple tries to do it. We're supposed to believe that James Earl Ray, who didn't have the skills this guy has, gets off one shot like that. So, Ray was on the run for over a month. He was in Toronto, Portugal, London, and then finally he's arrested at the London airport, Bill, and he enters a guilty plea. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now that was on the advice. Go ahead, Bill.
Let me just. So I'm looking at the pictures right now of where he supposedly was, and the view that he had.
Right.
I mean, there's no way. I can't imagine.
I know.
I'm looking at a picture of that tub.
Yeah, and imagine Bill standing on that tub, Bill.
No, I can't.
And the balance you have to have, Bill, and then you're holding a rifle, Bill. Even if you go all the way to the back and you rest your back against the back wall, or it's still there's no way to keep your balance on there. Like, I mean, it's like even a skilled operator like this Mike Baker had a lot of trouble doing it. And then to think he gets off this perfect shot. I mean, it's ridiculous, Bill. It's ridiculous. But again, it's like everything else when it comes to this. It's the same shit show over again, Bill, with JFK, with RFK, with, they have all these magic bullets and magical shots and the government's official story.
The thing is, Sean, he King, after JFK was assassinated, King, reportedly, I guess, or I don't know, they say that he told his wife that this is what's going to happen to me.
Yeah, I mean, he knew the threat was out there, Bill. There's no doubt about it. I mean, RFK knew, they all knew the threat was out there.
Yeah.
But getting back, James Earl Ray, he pleaded guilty on advice of his lawyer, a guy by the name of Percy Foreman, who was really, when you look at him, Bill, he's like a mob lawyer, is really his background. And he advised him to avoid the death penalty by electrocution, to plead guilty. But Ray would later dismiss Foreman and then recant his confession, claiming that he was set up by a man named Raul. And I'm sure you heard that name, Bill.
Yep.
And this is a key figure in the whole thing. And, we're not going to get into, like, I know William Pepper thinks he knows who the guy is, Raul. And if people want to read a couple of his great books, he goes into detail about Raul. But Raul is a key figure, and his name will come up in the civil trial. So we'll talk about him a little bit. But let's get into the civil trial. Anything you want to talk about, Bill, before we get into the civil trial?
No, let's get into that.
Okay, so 1999, the King family sues a guy named Lloyd Jowers. Okay, now Lloyd Jowers confessed to being involved in this. And, eventually, like I said, they're going to get the guilty verdict, and the courts are going to assign guilt to the U.S. government agencies. The highest percentage, I forget what the actual percentage was, and then a small percentage of Lloyd Jowers. And it's amazing that they won, Bill. And it's even more amazing that one Memphis reporter and one author, Jim Douglas, a tremendous author, were the only ones in the courtroom, Bill, besides, court personnel. I mean, that order had to come from the top. You can't tell me that ABC and New York Times and nobody had an interest in covering Martin Luther King civil trial. Are you kidding me? And we talked about this, Bill, like rewind to a couple years before when they had the O.J. Simpson trial, and they're just covering this 24/7. And like you said, they're still talking about it, Bill.
Right. Yep.
So let's get into some of the evidence that came out at the civil trial. And remember, Bill, when I'm saying this stuff here, this is not Sean Kane saying this stuff. This is stuff that came out at the civil trial.
Yeah.
So let's make that clear that, because there's going to be, some pushback on some of the stuff that's said here. But again, this is stuff that came out at the civil trial. So The jury concluded that Martin Luther King was assassinated by conspiracy that included U.S. government agencies and Memphis bar owner Lloyd Jowers. Now, according to the civil trial bill, there was levels of this conspiracy. There's the local level and there's the broader conspiracy, which there always is in these cases. And Jowers confessed, and he said that he was brought in by a man named Frank Liberto, who was a mafia-connected produce dealer. Now, as soon as Liberto's name mentioned, Bill, people got to bring in Carlos Marcello, who's down in New Orleans, and connection to him. But from my work looking in this, Liberto was more connected to the Dixie mob. And we're going to talk about them tonight, more so than Marcello, because everybody loves to bring Carlos Marcello into every single conspiracy there is. And I wrote a piece on Lisa P's page on Facebook about Carlos Marcello, and I hope we have a question. I hope we could get to it in the next time we do an episode on questions about Carlos Marcello, Bill, because I don't see him having any involvement in Martin Luther King or JFK. So when Liberto, this is more connected to the Dixie mob, okay? And according to Jowers, he was visited the day before by a man named Raul. Remember, James Earl Ray said he was set up by a man named Raul. Mm-hmm. And he brought Jowers a rifle. And they had this meeting at Jim's Grill that Jowers owned, and it was to plan the assassination of Martin Luther King. And according to Jowers, he said at the meeting was undercover Memphis PD officer Merrill McCullough, who would later go on, Bill, to have a distinguished career in the CIA. Now, McCullough is the guy in the picture, Bill, the famous picture he's pointing on the balcony there when King was shot.
Yeah.
And he was in this group called the Invaders, and they were working with Martin Luther King's group, and he was undercover. He was put there by the Memphis PD intelligence unit, and he was working undercover. And according to Jowers, he was at this meeting, and also at this meeting was Memphis Police Lieutenant Earl Clark, who was one of the best snipers in the department, another cop that Jowers didn't know, and two men in suits that he assumed were federal agents of some kind. Now, remember, Bill, this is testimony Jowers confessed to. This came out at the civil trial. We're talking about Memphis police officers and intelligence community people sitting down planning the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, this is just explosive stuff. And then after the assassination, Jowers claims he took the rifle and he hid it until this guy Raul picked it up. Okay, now there was a guy by the name of Floyd Newsom, Bill. He was a black firefighter and he was a civil rights activist. And he had just gotten back from Martin Luther King's famous Been to the Mountaintop speech, okay? And when he gets back, he's told that he's temporarily transferred effective April 4th.
And
from
Sean,
fire state.
Sean, that was the day before, right?
The meeting. The meeting with Jowers and them?
The speech.
Oh, yeah. And this guy just came back. This guy, right. Floyd Newsom, just came back from that speech.
Yeah.
And he worked at this fire station too, Bill, which is located right across from the Lorraine Motel.
Yeah.
And when he comes back, he's told that he's got this, he's being transferred from this fire station. Okay. And there was no reason for this transfer because they weren't like overworked. I mean, they needed the help there. But he was a black firefighter. He was transferred. And there was another black firefighter at the station, Norvell Wallace, and he was transferred, Bill, the same day. So you see what's happening here, Bill.
Yeah.
And then there was a Memphis PD detective by the name of Ed Reddit, who was always assigned to Martin Luther King every time he came to Memphis. Okay. And his inspector, he was assigned this time to follow Martin Luther King and watch him. And his inspector came to him and told him that he could leave and leave his post, that somebody else has taken over. But when Reddit did, he noticed there was nobody there like there was the last few times. And but he became concerned. So he went over to this fire station too and kind of set up watch to see what the heck was going on. And then Memphis PD intelligence officer Eli Arkin comes down to the fire station, grabs Reddit, tells him that he's ordered back to headquarters, and he's taken it to the office of police and fire director Frank Hollerman. Now, Hollerman is a former FBI agent and a really good friend of J. Edgar Hoover. And he orders Reddit home against his wishes. Okay. So you see what's happening, Bill. It's like the Secret Service and JFK, like they're taking away the protection.
They're clearing the deck.
They're clearing the deck.
They're wrapping up any loose ends.
Yes. And the thing, Bill, the next thing is the changing in the motel room was crucial because Martin Luther King originally was assigned to an inside room, Bill, that wasn't you couldn't be viewed from the street. Okay. And somebody changed that room to an outside room, Bill. Okay. And now, according to Lorraine Motel owner Walter Bailey, he got a call from somebody in King's group in Atlanta, and they changed it. But it's still a mystery to this day, Bill. And there's all kind of theories about who did it. I don't have an answer, so I'm not going to give any credence to any theories that I have. But whoever changed that room, Bill, I mean, you basically set Martin Luther King in a position to be assassinated from the outside, because otherwise there's no way they could shoot him from the street in the room that he originally had. So now, Bill, we're going to get to the broader conspiracy. And remember, Bill, this is all coming out at the civil trial. So this isn't me saying this stuff. This is stuff that evidence that came out at the civil trial. So Cartel Whedon was the captain of Fire Station 2. And he testified that he was on duty when 2 U.S. Army officers came in to see him, and they wanted to look out for the Lorraine Motel. So they had a briefcase, they had cameras. So he showed them up to the roofs of the fire station, and they were doing surveillance on Martin Luther King. And this is April 4th, Bill. Now, Dr. Doug Valentine testified, okay, at the civil trial, that while he was researching his book on the Phoenix program, and we talked about the Phoenix program, Bill, it was the CIA intelligence program that was against the Vietnam villagers in the Vietnam War. And when we did our Vietnam episodes, we talked a little bit about the Phoenix program. But he had talked to veterans in the Army's 111th Military Intelligence Group. And they said that Martin Luther King was under 24-hour surveillance on April 4th. Okay? So you can see what's going on here, Bill. The protection's being taken away. The intelligence community is watching him. Martin Luther King's under attack by the COINTELPRO operation. But the most explosive testimony is yet to come, Bill. Because, and this is where it really gets controversial. So remember, this is from the civil trial. So testimony from a CIA operative by the name of Jack Terrell, okay? And he was a whistleblower in the Iran-Contra scandal, Bill. And he was dying of liver cancer. So he wanted to get this off his chest. And he testified that his close friend, J.D. Hill, who was deceased at the time, confessed to him that he was a member of the Army 184 Delta Sniper Unit, okay? And that they were in Memphis on April 4th to shoot an unknown target. And they trained for a triangulated crossfire shooting, Bill. Okay, and the snipers would make their way up to positions on top of a water tower and 2 other buildings. And
this is starting to sound familiar, Sean.
Yeah, it's kind of sounds like Dealey Plaza, doesn't it, buddy?
Yep, just a bit.
But then their mission was canceled, Bill. So they scrubbed the mission, they get out of town, and then the next day they learned of the MLK shooting. So, you know, the implication here is that they were probably the backup team, you know, and then when they didn't need them anymore, you know, they scrubbed the mission, they got out of town. But just imagine, Bill, that's explosive information, Bill. And again, we could debate, it's controversial. There's a lot, you know, was that really true, this and that? But I just know that, you know, the jury must have believed it because they convicted, you know, and they came back with a conviction.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is just unbelievable stuff, Bill, you know, and I don't know. You have anything to add, buddy?
Yeah, I do. I have a lot to add. I mean,
Go ahead, buddy. Before I go on anymore, let me hear your thoughts.
this is a guy, this is a man, a hero, a man who had courage. He was a brilliant man. He's a man who we celebrate a holiday today.
Yes.
For him.
And he did all this through nonviolence, Bill.
All of it. And he was considered a national security threat.
Yes, in a major attack on the way by the COINTELPRO program by J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, it's mind-boggling, Bill.
It is.
I mean, he's a national security threat, but the mafia is not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get Hoover's direction. Like, I mean, obviously, let's just say it, Bill. I mean, Hoover was a racist, right? I mean, we can't argue that point, right?
I don't think there's a way to.
I mean, come on. I mean,
yeah. And the country at that time was so, we talk about now how divided we are. And I think a lot of our, the division in our country is mostly, I would say, political, socioeconomic, and certainly racial. But I think at that time it was 95% racial division in this country. There was just so much of it. It was so prevalent, and it was, it was in the news every day. And this was a man who was he was going against what so many people had believed their entire lives. And, obviously not, their beliefs weren't right, but this is what they had been taught. This is what they believed, that we should be separate, that we shouldn't, be going to the same schools. We shouldn't be drinking from the same water fountains. We shouldn't be using the same, restrooms. And this man was saying, we are equal. We are. It doesn't matter. The color of your skin doesn't matter. It's the content of your character that matters. And I have a dream that, that we will all be the same, that we will all, and he's, he gives these amazing, beautiful speeches that we talk about today. And he was essentially public enemy number one.
Well, once he goes beyond civil rights, Bill, and he goes into poverty and, anti-war, now he's really become a threat to the national security structure and to the ruling class. I mean, there's no other way to say it. And he was under attack by all these different groups.
Yeah.
So let's go more into the civil trial, Bill. So the cover up. So people from the House Select Committee on Assassinations testified at the civil trial that they seen documents, and I mentioned this about the Hoover memo, 3 weeks before the MLK assassination, that J. Edgar Hoover had secret meetings with people in the CIA connected to Richard Helms and military intelligence people in the Phoenix program, which we just talked about with Doug Valentine, Bill. My question is why? Tell me what purpose J. Edgar Hoover has talking to these people 3 weeks before Martin Luther King is assassinated. And they also discovered that there was Green Berets and military intelligence agents were in Memphis on April 4th. Now, for what purpose, Bill? I mean, they're probably going to come back and say riot control, but I mean, come on, Bill. And then there's a New York Times reporter, and this is what I talked about earlier, Bill. He saw a man in the bushes across the street, and he thinks that was a sniper. Now, the next day, the city of Memphis ordered the bushes cut down, along with the tree that was blocking the window that James Earl Ray supposedly shot from. Now,
and this is a crime scene.
This is a crime scene, Bill. Yes. And they just start cutting trees down and bushes. And according to William Pepper, the person that gave the order was Russell Atkins. Now, the Atkins family, Bill, is the Dixie mob. And Russell Atkins, and again, don't confuse this with Cosa Nostra. When I say Dixie, that's what I'm saying, Dixie mob, not Dixie mafia. And Russell Atkins was a leader in the Dixie Mob, and he was also a Ku Klux Klan member, Bill. He was a 32-degree Mason, and importantly, he was supervisor in the Memphis Public Works, which gave him access to make this call to cut this bushes down and cut this tree down, Bill.
Yeah.
And according to William Pepper, Bill, and this is going to be controversial when I say this, so remember, this is according to Pepper, and you can read his book, The Plot to Kill King. He said that Martin Luther King survived the gunshot and was taken to a hospital controlled by the Atkins family, and then he was smothered by a pillow by one of the doctors when he walked in with two men in suits who they claim were probably intelligence officers. And that's in the book, Plot to Kill King. So anybody wants to read that, they can read that. That's not me saying that. That's, the evidence that they have. So just imagine that, Bill. Just imagine the implications of all this. I mean, it's just incredible. It's just absolutely incredible, And then another thing I want to talk about, Bill, let's move on from the civil trial. You know who Judge Joe Brown is, right?
Right.
The TV show?
Yep.
Well, July of 1997, Judge Brown attempted to resolve this issue, whether James Earl Ray fired a shot. And when he does this, Bill, the entire city of Memphis comes down on him. It's almost like Jim Garrison again, all over again, down in New Orleans. And the DA's office attempts to remove Brown from the case. Okay. And he made no more rulings on the case once everybody comes down on him. And then he ends up around the same time, but I can't really get the timeline down. That kind of happens almost simultaneously, kind of. But he gets a TV show. So it's almost like, are they saying like, hey, here's this TV show if you just drop this case. But to his credit, Bill, okay, he still was involved with the case personally because the one thing about Judge Joe Brown is he was a gun guy, Bill. He was really, knew his way around guns. He understood guns. He fired guns. And he did his own investigation, Bill, basically. And what he discovered is that the bullet that was pulled out of Martin Luther King had a different rate of rifling twist than the gun that Ray used. And it also had a defect that, according to him, wasn't apparent on the death slug that killed Martin Luther King. So Brown said that King was shot with a KM-21 NATO caliber weapon with a modified telescopic sight, and it was modified by a company called Leatherwood, which was a government contractor used by the CIA, Bill. Okay, they used special supersonic ammunition with a suppressor to reduce the velocity to below supersonic to confuse where the sound actually came from. Now, Bill, does that sound like a lone gunman to you?
No.
I mean,
it does not.
It's in, to wrap this up, and then we'll have a summary on it. But William Pepper, said this is a direct quote from him. The same government that honors Martin Luther King today with a holiday is the same government that killed him.
Yeah. And
that's enough out of you, Billy. I mean, it's
wow.
Incredible, Bill. It's incredible. And let's just summarize, Bill, because I know you said before, I heard you say this before, that assassination, the impact of that marginalized the civil rights movement. And today, the civil rights leaders know where the line is and they don't cross the line. And that's why today, maybe the civil rights leaders are not as effective as, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. You want to go into thoughts on that?
I actually have a quote here from Jesse Jackson.
Okay.
In 2004, he was with Martin Luther King.
Yes.
When he was assassinated.
Yes.
The quote is, the fact that there were saboteurs to disrupt the march within our own organization, we found a very key person who was on the government payroll. So infiltration within.
Which is, Bill, that is a textbook of COINTELPRO. That's what they do. This is what they would later do with the Black Panthers, with Freddie Hampton. They would put in an infiltrator, and that infiltrator is supposed to disrupt, cause, with Malcolm X, the same thing, cause dissension in the ranks, create violence within the ranks, and this is what the infiltrator does. He's supposed to destroy the organization from the inside.
Yeah. So let me continue here with the quote.
Go ahead.
Okay, so infiltration within, saboteurs from without, and the press attacks.
Yes.
I will never believe that James Earl Ray had the motive, the money, and the mobility to have done it himself. Our government was very involved in setting the stage for, and I think the escape route for James Earl Ray. That's a quote.
Well, I mean, Bill, the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, James Earl Ray falls to me in the same category as Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan.
I agree.
I mean, they're innocent. I don't believe any of the evidence against them is credible. And again, there's a couple things that you could point to in each case, like the paraffin test with Oswald. It's game over. Can't put him on the 6th floor. It's game over. Same things with James Earl Ray. Same thing with Sirhan. He's 6 feet in front of Bobby Kennedy when the shot came from him back, point blank range. He didn't do it. Well, James Earl Ray didn't have the skills of a rifle to pull this shot off. And even if he did, can't do it with a tree in his way, with a big branch blocking his view.
Standing on
a tub.
And if our listeners have the opportunity to go to and just go, you can even just go to the Wikipedia page talking about the MLK
right, and see that.
And there are pictures there. There's a picture of that bathtub. There's no way you could even stand on that bathtub
there's not enough room, Bill.
For
the
minute.
Balance that you have to have. No, I mean it's
incredible.
And then you use a public bathroom, Bill. This guy goes on the run. They can't catch him for a month, but he's dumb enough to use a public bathroom to pull this assassination off. Like, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Incredible.
And it just, and it like you said, Bill, it marginalized the civil rights movement, and the same thing with the Kennedy assassination. It marginalized the office of the presidency because everybody knows there's a line, and if you cross that line, this is what happens. And you see the same thing that happened with Judge Joe Brown, Bill. It happened with Jim Garrison, where the entire system comes down on him. He says, let's find out once and for all if James Earl Ray fired that shot. And then instead of backing him up, the forces, the powers to be come down on him. And, it's the same thing that happened with Jim Garrison. His character assassinated, he was attacked, and it's just a shame, Bill, that, here we are. But the civil trial is amazing, Bill, and people could go back and look at, I know there's interviews with Jim Douglas, who was in the courtroom for that. He talks a lot about that. You could go back and read what William Pepper said. I know Jim DiEugenio and Lisa Pease did a lot of work on Martin Luther King. Their book, The Assassinations, there's a lot of stuff in there on Martin Luther King, and people could read about that. And, I'm sure Lisa will have some comments. I'm sure I missed a couple of things Lisa will point out. But, it's an amazing thing, Bill. This is the anniversary of Martin Luther King, who was considered by J. Edgar Hoover a national security threat. Can you believe that?
Amazing. And then, we had reactions, of course, the famous speech that RFK gave in, what was it, Indianapolis?
Indianapolis, yeah. And the thing is, Bill, when RFK gives that speech, remember, it's a long time before cell phones and everything else, and the people that were standing out there waiting, they didn't have any idea that Martin Luther King was assassinated. Yeah. And the authorities told RFK, they said, listen, we don't want you to go out there. We can't protect you. And the RFK said, listen, I don't need you to protect me. I'm going out there. And they said, we don't feel safe. And he said, well, that's your problem. And I'm going out there. And he basically did it ad lib. And he gave that tremendous speech. And that was one of the only cities that night that didn't riot. Yeah. He asked them not to riot. They didn't. And that was an amazing speech. But this whole story, Bill, is incredible. And Martin Luther King, I mean, it's just a shame the attack that he was under, Bill. And when you look at, his popularity was down. I mean, 63% of Americans, Bill, had a non-favorable view of Martin Luther King. Can you believe that? I mean, it's just, yeah. So I think we covered, we did a lot tonight, Bill. We covered a lot of good ground, and this was a great episode. And hopefully we'll have guests on, that really, studied this investigation and the situation. Maybe we can get Jim and Lisa to talk more about it.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, definitely worth more discussion, and you did a great job as usual, Sean, putting this all together, all of this information, and it's kind of a sobering thought. It's a sad day. When you think about what we lost and who we lost, and
just how he was under attack, Bill. Like when you really look into the COINTELPRO operation and you look into Operation Chaos and you see how the government was attacking these certain groups and organizations, and it's like, this is a peaceful organization. Like, even if they used COINTELPRO, Bill, to go after the mafia, I would still say this is illegal. Like the tactics they're using is still illegal, but at least you could maybe justify it in saying, hey, the mafia is a legitimate threat to national security.
They're committing crime.
They're committing crimes and they're controlling the unions. They're controlling industries like the concrete industry. I mean, they're really impacting, economically. But this, to say that Martin Luther King's a national security threat is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
But
same here.
Yeah, and again, Bill, we get the media saying, James Earl Ray is guilty and Sirhan's guilty and Lee Harvey Oswald is guilty. They just don't want to open that door, Bill.
Right.
There's no conspiracies in their mind, and that's it. Everything is a lone gunman, buddy.
Yep.
So that's enough out of you, pal.
All right, Sean. Good job. That's enough out of you, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Good night, everybody.